Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Thanks, Don. Welcome, everyone, to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. Our guest today, returning guest, Regan Edens. I do want to mention that we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the Defense Industrial Base. Our focus at NeoSystems as a managed service provider is on organizations seeking certification, and that's mostly who we have in our audience today. If you have some questions in the audience, please send those in on the Zoom Q&A feature, and I'll try to work those into the conversation with Regan as time allows. I'll start with the introduction. Regan hasn't been with us since late last year, so it's been a while. We're happy to have him back. He has a distinguished career as an Army officer and a DoD civilian with the intelligence community. He's now focused on transformation and innovation in the cybersecurity world as co-founder and chief transformation officer at DTC Global. Until recently, Regan was a member of the board of directors of the CMMC accreditation body, where he chaired the standards committee, co-chaired the training committee, and helped with much of the foundational work for the certification side of the CMMC initiative. Regan, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Ed. It's my pleasure as always. You guys are outstanding.
Thanks. When you last joined us was late 2020. We were celebrating some exciting progress in terms of the CMMC AB building out CMMC ecosystem. At that time, training programs were just emerging, just getting underway. And since then, there's been a lot of transformation. You've departed the board, leaving things in the hand of a growing full-time staff. So realizing you're no longer in a sort of official spokesperson capacity, are there any kind of news items from the AB side of things that you want to share before we dive into some questions?
Sure. So, again, it's was an honor and privilege to serve. I am very, very fortunate to have, shared the space with amazing directors, volunteer directors on the board. There are a few last of the Mohicans of the original directors, and quite frankly, it's just enormous. It's an enormous passion project, right? And so my hat's off to Wayne and to Jeff in particular, who continue to carry the baton. And so I'm just grateful to have served. I think that what would be helpful for most of the folks out there is to sort of get a sense of the lay of the land in that transition. So we had director doers. Those are subject matter experts that were picked up from industry, really focused on building the CMMC ecosystem from scratch. And that's if anybody's ever done a startup, they understand how really, truly difficult that is. Not only underneath obviously the scrutiny of the public and transparency necessary for the public interest, but also, starting from $0 funded, right? And so as we built that out, and folks have done an amazing job in really starting the training program with Ben, and of course Jeff's work on credentialing and accreditation, Wayne's support, and our work on standards. So in the transition on the board, you see a real focus from sort of doing to transition those responsibilities to the professional staff. And you see a more of a governance role and a backseat role, which is appropriate for the directors, and then the front seat role in the professional staff. And I got to hand it to Matt, Travis, Mike Snyder, Kyle, John Haney. They are amazing folks. And I got to tell you, I am a little bit biased because I worked with them so tightly over the last year, but those are the people that you want doing this. You should have trust and confidence that they are extremely vigilant, that they are amazing, and they are working very, very hard to get this done. So in that transition, we see the professional staff really focusing on internally infrastructure, assessing, certifying the C3POs, working with DIBCAC to get that done, working with the DoD PMO, working with the C3POs to uncover items and information that we haven't talked about yet, that are just going to be discovered in the doing process, right? So it's really in the professional staff that's really in the doing. You see the expansion of Kyle and Mike Snyder's training program with the provisional, not just the assessors, but also the instructors. I was a part of the instructor program. I paid full price just like everybody else. And I've got to tell you, seeing the quality of the provisional professional instructors that were in the class with me was extraordinary. So we've got a lot of upcoming superstars that are really going to continue to blossom and take center stage. We've got the expansion and the depth and breadth of detail to the training curriculum for each of the certified and accredited and registered roles. That continues to expand, and that's no easy task. And then you also have to build out the test, which is ongoing concurrently. Some of my industry working group members are working on that process. And so you have a lot of, as usual, you have a lot of moving pieces really moving concurrently in the background. And one of my senior mentors told me once, he said, Regan, listen, when you lead, you got to be a duck. You got to, calm on top of the water and be paddling as fast as you can underneath the water. And that's really what's taking place right now. What seems to be a lull really isn't a lull at all. What's happening is all of the infrastructure work and the sort of that back end support that just needs to be built out, policies, documents, all of those things are really taking place under the water. So they've got to strengthen and refine the upcoming documents that are going to be released. They've got internal guidance that they've got to clarify, and they've got to seek DoD's guidance from. And they're starting to uncover the really important details that you really don't think of in the beginning, that you can only really understand as you execute. At the end of the day, what the AB is doing is really defining what it's going to be really good at with the constraint of resources and time right now, and what it's not going to be able to do. Right, it can't do all things. It's a limited staff. The demand is large. So those things are critical. On the DoD side of the house, what we're seeing is that they're working very, very rapidly on developing those documents that are important to us. We've got the scoping guide and scoping document. That's absolutely critical. Everyone understands that. We've got an internal review that's mentioned oftentimes frequently or recently on LinkedIn posts, that supposedly DoD's on a hold, and nothing could be further from the truth. They are, of course, doing an internal review, as they should, but you've got a larger gap than probably what was expected when you transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration and the appointees. So that gap is important, because those new appointees need to take the leadership helm of this effort. But it goes without saying, though, that DFAR 7012 continues, that NIST 800-171 is not going away, and that 92% of the controls represented underneath CMMC Level 3 are taking place and required right now underneath DFAR 7012, and have been for the last 4 years, right? So you've got a lot of moving pieces with the strengthening and enforcement of DFAR 7012. That freight train has left the building, and it is headed down the tracks right now. So as a CMMC program works to seat the political employees, works to as they should get their direction and guidance as they come on board. Filling those political vacancies is critically important. But at the meantime, though, the PMO staff and the other mechanisms of DoD never stop. So you've got coordination and DoD policy. You've got coordination between DIBCAC and the PMO and the DoD CUI program office. You've got all of these sort of mechanistic elements that have got to take place, budget, resources, and policy that have really got to catch up with the speed of what we've done over the last 2 years. So all of those things, you're going to see the CMMC assessment plan that the AB's developed and the DoD is reviewing. So that's going to be finalized and going to come out. The scoping guide is going to be finalized and coming out. You've got the federal rulemaking process that is critically important to continuing to moving the ball forward. And you've got this huge back end piece again underneath the water that's taking place, of getting answering the questions, reviewing the options, changes, and so on and so forth within that rulemaking process. you've also got the FAR rulemaking process. The FAR CUI rule is coming down the track. It should be released. My understanding is in September. And so I've been working with the ISU to understand what the requirements and what the details of that rule are. And that rule is critically important to navigating the path forward underneath CUI. And so again, how does that affect all of the policies, all of the sort of mechanisms that take place inside of DoD, and also it certainly will impact the final rule as well. So these moving pieces are important, and all the time you've got Chris Newman and Defense Acquisition University developing the training program for contracting officers, developing the program managers, training for the program managers about DFARS, about CUI, and about the upcoming CMMC requirements. And so all of that really is working sort of functioning for better, for worse, at the speed of government, right? And still we have this agile, very quick process. We're in the second year of a 5-year rollout. And so you're going to see year 3 jump very rapidly, and year 4 jump very rapidly in the depth and breadth of requirements.
The audience question asking, what new FAR rule are you referring to? Is there something new in the FAR, or are you referring to DFARS? Yeah, so
I realize that people are doing their businesses, so you wouldn't be surprised to what's happening. So there's a FAR CUI rule that's coming out that was released on I can send you the link, and it makes the announcement that rule is coming. And so the details of that rule aren't, and the nuts and bolts of the FAR rule is that everyone recognizes the fact that there are two functional responsibilities that are taking place right now. One is that the DoD has a responsibility to mark and properly identify CUI, and everyone who spent more than 5 minutes doing this knows that they're not doing that. But that does not abdicate the responsibility for the industry to meet those requirements and for them to properly identify and mark unmarked CUI. So that's absolutely a requirement. And the reality is that they're very likely to create far more CUI than they are to receive in performance of the contract. So in order to navigate that process, because many organizations, most of my clients, and most of the people we've talked to over the last 2 years, don't really have a strong grasp of what CUI is and is not. And so one of the challenges is that the FAR rule says that the DoD or any federal agency that has CUI is going to have to declare what CUI is in the contract, basically verbatim. Now, the default to that, most certainly for DoD, is that, or in program managers and contracting officers, until they get their arms around what CUI is and is not, is that they're going to say that everything is CUI. So all derivative products. That's right. That's right. All derivative products, all technical information that's not publicly available, right, that meets the criteria of the definition, is CUI. And then they're going to check that box, but that will be a second addition to, okay, if I, with the receipt of the contract, with my terms and agreements, then I have now recognized the fact that I create CUI, I develop CUI in performance of the contract. The DoD has said in another way, everything of the technical information that meets the definition of CUI that's not publicly available is CUI, and now it's my responsibility, and every single tier sub-supplier who receives that information or a subset of that information now has to respond that they're already doing. So it would be better over the long run, as the DoD refines their training and education, that inevitably the DoD and program managers, well-intended program managers and contract officers are going to be up to zero in. But at the end, everyone is fearful, as they should be, to protect as much of the information as is possible. And so in the absence of that, they're just going to say everything. But that FAR rule will help the long run, because as training education improves, those contracting officers in DoD will be able to narrow down, okay, it's 90% that's that's that CUI, and so that's going to take some time for maturity. But and that rule will help that maturity. It will help expedite the maturity because it defines it as an absolute requirement in every single federal contract. So every single federal contract will have to declare, does this contract have CUI in it? And then the intention of the rule is help to define what types of CUI in it is in it. But again, until we mature the training education process within the program managers, the contracting officers, they're always going to default to it. Well, everything is CUI, right? And that's a short-term answer. It's not the long-term answer.
So I want to circle back on some of the duck paddling underwater comments, but before that, I want to get one more audience question, and this is about whether there's any CMMC in any NASA contracts. And so I just maybe generalize that in the sense of, what have you seen with respect to interest in CMMC outside of DoD? To my knowledge, nobody's formally adopted it yet, including NASA or any others, right? But has there been any
yeah, so
beyond just a twinkle in the eye at this point?
Yeah, so GSA has incorporated D4 7012 into some of their DoD contracts, their acquisition contracts. Okay, so acquisition contracts related to DoD. Okay, so that's happening right now. That is absolutely underneath GSA. So the DHS is rapidly advancing to adopt CMMC. You're going to see it. It's happening. It's happening right now. The back end work is being done. NASA, absolutely, the back end work is being done. So you're going to see, in my opinion, by the 5th year of the adoption of DoD for CMMC, you're going to see every federal agency with technical information related to products and services adopt CMMC or a DFARS-like rule inside of their contracts. That's going to happen. And it's going to be a requirement because remember, the FAR rule does something very interesting. The FAR rule says you have to declare CUI in your contracts, every single federal contract. Well, there's the secondary impact of that that's not happening right now, which is when I declare that CUI is in that contract, that means that we have to protect that CUI that's in that contract. So the very, very likely, I think it's unavoidable, is that when the FAR rule is adopted and every single federal contract is evaluated whether or not it has CUI in it, there's a requisite enforcement piece that's the second half of that. So I think that is the inevitability of what I just said, which is by the 5th year, you're going to have every single federal agency that declares CUI in a federal contract be required to enforce the protections of those contracts.
And why would they not? Or CMMC is going to have, it already has a pretty big head start on anything any other agency could cook up, and it's been all the ecosystem development has been funded and fueled by the DoD, et cetera. So, the head start is long and getting longer. So you mentioned about, things look quiet on top and fast underneath. And we've definitely seen that, where a lot of more of the work that's going on is behind the scenes. And so there's this, the visible progress in the pace of contracts showing up with CMMC requirement is slower than people expected. So, some DIV members are starting to slow down their decision-making process because they see that they see what's above the water, the ducks swimming peacefully through the water, and they don't see the rapid paddling. Is there any benefit of waiting for things to sort out? I mean, I see it as almost like let's wait and see what comes of this. Do you see any benefits there?
Well, so I'm going to answer that question in 2 parts. One is, what am I seeing in industry? Because I do this every day, right? I mean, people are overwhelmed by all the requirements and what they need to do. And, at the end of every conversation, I always tell them, listen, don't panic, right? We do this every single day. This is what we do, right? So I think that there's a cautionary tale here. And the cautionary tale is I always remind people that D4 7012 is an existing requirement right now. And that freight train of enforcement, if you're not paying attention to it, it's going to run you over. Because remember that you've got D4 7012 and D4 7019 and 20, which are being really enforced right now. You've got D4 7012 as a requirement to be NIST 800 compatible with the 110 requirements underneath NIST 800 171. And remember that represents roughly 92% of the controls underneath level 3. So that's been a requirement since 2017. It is a requirement right now. And so, even if we don't even talk about CMMC, we just talk about NIST 800 171, which is 92% of the CMMC practices at level 3, then the reality is we have a train on the tracks right now that's headed right for us. Now, if you look in terms of last year, the NCIS was and Navy authorized the NCIS for criminal investigations for fraud and False Claims Act underneath underneath D4 7012. You can expect that expand to military services. Clearly, our adversaries are not waiting, right? China is not waiting on us to secure our data, right? Neither is Russia. Neither all the other criminal franchises that have made a heyday over the last decade and a half of our defense industry information. So that's not, no one is waiting. No one but the good guys are waiting, right? And so we cannot wait any longer. So the reality is that you've got DCMA conducting internal audits, and that's expanding, right? Because their teams are expanding because they have to meet the demand for all sorts of different requirements, including their internal audits. You've got the military services. It's inevitable that they will expand enforcement and verification and validation and criminal sanctions and actions, contract actions against contractors who are basically lying, who are basically, self-reporting that they've been compliant. You've got a standing requirement right now underneath the DoD, and most people don't know this, that if I receive a contract, and this has been since 2017, folks, if I receive a contract and I've not declared within the first 30 days of that contract what my POAM items are, and I'm responsible for declaring that POAM item list not only to the government, DoD, but also to the prime contractors. And if I'm a 14-tier sub, I'm responsible for reporting it to my my prime contractor, right? The person whom I'm working under. And they're responsible for reporting it to the 13th level and to the 12th level and to the 11th level, right? So that requirement is a standing requirement right now within 30 days. If you do not report what your POAM items are, if you don't know what your POAM items are, then the DoD assumes that you are compliant. Bad things happen because you haven't declared what your POAM items are, right? So you're misrepresenting the fact by default that you are compliant with D4 7012 when you're really not. So most people don't realize that. So it's very important that people fixate and focus on D4 7012, NIST 800 171, and let CMMC take care of itself. Because again, as I said, that freight train of enforcement is headed down the tracks right now. If we look at SPRS, many of my clients, I had 2 clients that said to me, Regan, they're not going to release this next contract to me unless I've got my SPRS, scored and registered within the DCMA system. Okay, all right. Well, let's do that. Where are you at on your D4 7012 compliance? And then they start. Well, you mean we have to do that before we do that? Yeah, you do.
Otherwise,
right?
It's not looking so good.
Yeah. So they don't understand this sequence of events that needs to take place, right? So that SPRS, I've had several contracts that were on the verge of not being awarded because there wasn't an SPRS registration and scoring. So that again, that enforcement is being taken place as it should be from the primes to the subs and from the subs to the subs to the subs, right? So it's very important that people stay focused on what is important right now. CMMC will take care of itself. What you really need to stay laser focused on are meeting those requirements, working your POAM items, getting registered in SPRS. If you've got a low score, that's probably accurate. If you've got a high score, it's probably not accurate. You probably don't understand the requirements very well. I had a multi-billion-dollar client. We assessed 15 of their sites, and their mean score was a negative 131. A negative 131. So if you think that you've got a score of 90, or you've got a positive score of 90 or a score of 80, it's very unlikely that you understand the requirements, right? You really need to deep dive on that. You need to take the requirements as seriously in that scoring as you would as if an assessor standing right there. Because remember, when Uncle Sam asks you to write something down, they're going to remember what you wrote down. And if you write down a score of 90 and then you come up with an audit, or your prime contractor comes up for an audit and they come back and they said, you're like a negative 110, right? Then that differentiation, is it a sin of omission? Is it a sin of commission? Or is it just our ignorance of the fact that my IT guy or my IT team really didn't understand the requirements and they didn't even know about the assessment objectives? So they just read the practices and they thought they were good, right? So these sort of things are headed to get us into deep trouble very quickly. And a last point of this is that the competitive advantage gained are going to be the winners, and the winners may take all. So I've got several clients who I said, listen, we're going to walk through the paperwork. We're going to get you on track for real. And when we do that, when we get the risk and security assessments done, we get your plan of action milestones done, and we get your SPRS scored, and then we get your system security plan published. You need to go back to every contracting officer, every sub-tier supplier that you work with, every buyer that you work with, and you need to tell them that you are compliant and you are headed towards CMMC certification for real. And you're going to be surprised about what's happened. Their relief, number one, and number two is the opportunity. I have had 3 customers, by the time we were finished really getting them compliant, one client expanded to a second facility, and the other client shortly thereafter is looking at a 5-fold increase to their top line revenue. Why? Because buyers and suppliers and contracting officers are desperate to find really compliant subcontractors and contractors. So coming to them and saying, look, would you like to come to our facility and take a look at how we manage our data? Would you like to look at our policies and procedures? I'll share. I'm not going to share you with all my SSP, but I'll show you. I'll share it with you to show that we really know what we're doing. Or do we have POAM items? Of course we do, but we're working on them, actively working on them, and we are looking forward to the opportunity to be CMMC certification. When you distinguish yourself from your peers who are hiding or avoiding those emails or not responding to those emails, you create opportunity for your company.
And the other piece of the SPUR score that I think you go to the kind of bad things can happen is you're not just reporting your current score, but you're reporting a date by which you're going to be at 110.
Exactly.
So you're sending a notice to the government, official notice that says I will be fully compliant by this date. Hopefully you're accurate in your projections. So we're getting close to the end of time. I want to ask kind of a wrap-up question. As you've watched industry responding, right, and what they're doing, what do you see people spending time and cycles on that, in your view, is a complete waste of time and we should shift to something more productive?
Well, I think that that's a great question. So I think that people need to stop looking for a one-trick pony. There is no one-trick pony. Right now, very detailed policies and procedures are the key to success, right? Not ambiguous, your IT guy, wrote the access control policy at lunchtime and it's got, pizza sauce stained on it, right? You need to stop looking to a one technology solution. There is no one technology solution. You need to stop looking at providers that really don't know what they're doing, right? Everyone can hang a shingle out on CMMC and say, oh, yeah, we know what we're doing. You really need to go to those industry experts that really are knowledgeable about the reality of the requirements. And if you've got someone that's telling you this is an easy thing to walk through, I would avoid them like a plague, right? If you're going to do dial a death on Google and Google, how to be CMMC compliant in 15 minutes, you're going to get all of the wrong answers. So the reality is, I think that people are focused on the easy button. There is no easy button. This is hard to do. We just have to lean into the hard things. We have to get serious about training our people and getting them knowledgeable about the requirements, or we are not going to make it there. It's time to embrace the hard things. And I think looking for the easy button, all I have to do is just buy the software. No, no. I wish that were true. It's just not true, right? I just have to go to this one provider, and then just magically, my world, I just GCC high. All we have to do is just be able to afford GCC high, get into it, and then everything's fine. Nope, that's not true. So you've got a lot of complexity here, and you just have to stop looking for the easy button and start looking for the hard truths, and surrounding yourselves with peoples and technologies and support, and focusing your resources on really taking this seriously for a very short but intensive period of time, and then getting compliant, and then getting back to your products and services.
I want to show you what I keep on my desk to remind me of your advice.
That's right.
It's been there for about the last 10 years or so since they were.
That's right. I mean, there is.
I don't ever push it. It never works.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we spent the last 2 years developing our policies and procedures that are as detailed as they can possibly be. Why? Because they need to be as accurate as they can be, because you have no idea whether the assessor or the auditor or the supply chain person that's walking through your front door has any idea whether or not they actually know what they're doing. And so if you want the outcome, in my world, growing up in special operations in the IC, you define your world, right? You don't wait for someone to define it for us. So the role for industry now is to stop waiting on DoD to save us. Stop waiting on the AB to save us. They're going to do as much as they possibly can, but it's time for industry to step forward, fill the gaps, standardization, scale, quality, and leadership. And we have to accept the fact that no one has the single solution, that we build consortiums of people who are deadly smart at what they're doing, and are willing to embrace and the cooperative relationships of those partners out there who do what they do best, and embrace them, and bring solutions together for multiple providers when necessary, right? And then to be able to accurately embrace what those hard truths are, and how do we get there from here? We need to stop whining. The rucksack is heavy. I get that. I promise you, I do. No one understands it better than I. I do this every single day. So I get the fact that this is complex. I get the fact that this is confusing. I get the fact that this is frustrating, because all of the answers are not before us. But we still have to do something, because the mission continues. And we have to avoid the risk that is growing. It is inevitable about what the risk is underneath DFAR 7012, what the real risk to our data is from China and Russia. And we have to really be willing to embrace that, and move out, and execute this and sustain it, and then focus back on our products and services.
Regan, that's some great advice, great perspective. Appreciate it. We are at the end of our time. I do have a lot of audience questions on the CUI topic, so we may need to tee up another session of this series where we focus just on that. We touched on it a little bit in this, but
well, Ed, one of the things that I would suggest
is a topic we need to dive into.
Sure. And one of the things I would suggest, Ed, is that we're going to do a CMMC bootcamp event at the end of September, the 29th, I believe. One of the topics that we're going to dive into 6-hour session, like serious, in the trenches, hips up to the mud. What is CUI and what is not CUI, right? What do the policies and procedures got to look like for real, right? How do we navigate the practices and actually be compliant with the practices and everything that's expected, right? So I'm sorry, basic reference architectures. What does right look like for the size of my organization? So I suggest, and I would love to do a CUI session with you guys, but if folks want to get serious about the details of that, we're coming up a CMMC bootcamp event at the end of September. So folks should keep an eye out for that over LinkedIn.
Sounds good. So thanks very much to you for joining us. Thanks for the audience for your time and attention. Please join us for future town hall meetings. Our next session is going to be Wednesday, August 18th at our regular time of 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have returning co-guests Allison Giddens, president of Wintech, and Mike Baker, who's CISO from General Dynamics Information Technologies. They're going to discuss their efforts to stay close to CMMC within their own organizations, and also their role on the Industry Advisory Council for the CMMC AB that Regan mentioned earlier today. So looking forward to that conversation next Wednesday. If you need details on this or past events or future events, Go to our website, neosystemscorp.com, for those details. Thanks.
Thank you, Ed.